Hey everyone, it's great to meet you all and hang out here. I wish we could all be in Tel Aviv, but it's equally as fun and interesting to be safe and learning more. This has been an incredible summit. I can't tell you how much I've actually learned. I'm taking copious notes and all of those fun things. So I hope everybody is enjoying themselves. And thank you again for your time for my presentation. I'm going to basically send a lot of information your way today so that everybody can learn more about my area of expertise. So let's hop on in. So, once again, how to be better in bed, sleeping for peak performance. And what does that mean? I'm your host, Dr. Michael Bruce. I'm a high performance sleep coach, meaning that I work with people from around the world, teaching them more and more about how to get a better quality sleep and live a better quality life. So it turns out that sleep is actually represented by two separate systems in the brain. One is called your sleep drive, which, by the way, is a lot like hunger. You ever notice I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. I eat something and that hunger begins to dissipate. The same holds true with sleep. When a cell eats a piece of glucose, something comes out the back end. One of those things is a substance called adenosine. Adenosine works its way through your system, gets to a very specific receptor site in your brain. As adenosine accumulates, you get sleepier and sleepier and sleepier. Now, I'm a bit of a sleep geek, as they say, and I like to look at all the different aspects of it. And I was looking at the molecular structure of adenosine, and I noticed over the course of time that it's very similar to the molecular structure of caffeine. In fact, it's off by one molecule, which is interesting because one of the things that we know is caffeine is a big disruptor of sleep. And so this apparently has to do with this adenosine receptor site. And as caffeine fits in there perfectly, it will block your adenosine, and that is why you stay awake after a cup of coffee. Unfortunately, your brain burns through that caffeine pretty quickly. Adenosine comes flooding in, and that's when you have a caffeine crash, which most people seem to have somewhere between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, which is when people naturally are getting tired anyway. There's an entire second system that's really, really important, and we're going to spend a lot of time on today, and it's called your circadian rhythm. So, your circadian rhythm, also a lot like hunger. You ever notice how you get hungry around breakfast time and around lunchtime and around dinner time? The same holds true with sleep. Most people, at least in North America, we have a tendency to go to bed somewhere between 10 and 11 o'clock at night, generally speaking. Now, in Europe, that actually time can be a bit later. In Latin America, they do this wonderful thing during the day called a siesta, and then they get to stay up much later in the evenings. So we've got all kinds of different cultural aspects to our sleep. But our circadian rhythms, once we're kind of in an environment and participating in that environment, that culture's sleep habits, we really want to try to stick to our circadian rhythm as best we can. Now, this is a slide that you might remember from back in high school. This is what's called a hypnogram, and I'm going to teach everybody some very small pieces of information that you're going to be able to use in a whole host of ways. So if you look here on this histogram, you'll see that the orange represents wake. Then you go from orange down to gray into light sleep. You then go down into deep sleep, which is stage 3, 4 sleep, represented here by the dark blue, back to stage 2, and then on into light blue, which is REM sleep. That is not the band from Athens that had a lot of top 40 hits. That was my best joke of the lecture, just letting you know. So when we go through this cycle, it takes the average human 90 minutes to go through this cycle. That's an important piece of information I want you to log into your brain. The average human, by the way, has 5 of these cycles. So I'm going to dispel a myth to everyone right now. So if the average cycle is 90 minutes long and the average human has 5 of those, 5 times 90 is 450 minutes. Divided by 60 is 7.5 hours. 8 hours is a myth. Let me be very clear. 8 hours is a myth. You do not have to force yourself to try to get 8 hours of sleep every single night. You should allow your body to get the sleep that it needs so that when you wake up, you feel refreshed. I'm the sleep doctor. I go to bed at midnight. I wake up at 6:13 every single day without an alarm. That is what my body needs, right? So again, 8 hours is a myth, not something that you have to focus on, but waking up feeling refreshed is something that you want to focus on. A couple things that you're also going to want to notice here. Deep sleep, which is represented again by the dark blue on the left-hand side of the screen, is mostly in the first third. REM sleep has a tendency to travel and be more towards the end of the evening. That's going to become important a little bit later in the lecture. So what do these stages do and why do we really care about them? Stages 3 and 4 is the wake up and feel great sleep. That's really your physical restoration. This is where we see blood pressure dropping, we see respiration slowing, and something called growth hormone is emitted. So for folks who don't know what growth hormone is, it's like the best anti-aging thing there is, right? This is like it all happens in stage 3, and this is where true cellular repair occurs. And growth hormone affects everything from metabolism to muscle growth to, I mean, it's literally like the one thing that seems to go everywhere and help us out. Remember, this happens mostly in the first third of the night. This is also going to become important when we start talking about substances that people use right before bed, including caffeine and alcohol. Yes, folks, I am going to talk about those too. But don't worry, you'll still be able to drink wine and have caffeine and get a good night's sleep, I promise. Just not all right before bed. So, what about REM sleep? REM sleep is our mental restoration. So, REM sleep, we've now discovered, is when we're moving information from our short term memory to our long term memory. During stages 3 and 4, we filter out information that we no longer want, along with several proteins in our brain to get them out to avoid things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and things of that nature. So, again, stage 3, 4 is critical, critical, critical for our overall health. When we get to REM sleep, we've kind of figured out what data we want to keep to be able to retrieve and answer questions and ride a bicycle and all of those types of things. And so we want to move that information into our long-term memory. So our brain has to create an organizational substructure, kind of like a bunch of filing cabinets, right? And so what ends up happening is this piece of information has got to find the right filing cabinet, the right file drawer, and the right file to be deposited in for retrieval. It doesn't always happen so easily. Our brain has thousands and thousands of pieces of information that are flowing into it at all times. And so many times what we need to do is we have a dream. And the dream actually represents this locking in of information into our hard drive. But sometimes our dreams are kind of funky. And so if you have a dream where you walk downstairs and your dog is eating a bowl of spaghetti with your second grade teacher at the kitchen table and you have no idea why, probably what happened was you had Italian for dinner and you want to remember the restaurant because it was pretty good. Your dog may have jumped on your bed, which kind of upset you in the middle of the night. And your second grader was talking about school, which reminded you of your second grade teacher. And both of those pieces of information got locked onto her. And that's why you had a funky dream. So the good news is that in many cases, dreams can actually be very effective. But in many cases, it's just what was going on in our lives just before we went to sleep. I have done some work with dream therapy before. This is extremely different than dream interpretation. Dream therapy is where people take the substance of the dreams, write them down, and bring them into a therapy session. And then it's discussed in therapy because dream theory would dictate that one of the aspects of dreams is that it helps us process through our emotions while it's also putting logins into our memory. And so that processing sometimes needs to occur outside of the unconscious mind. And there are certain therapists that can actually take advantage of that. Interestingly enough, your muscles become incredibly relaxed during REM sleep, in fact, to the point of paralysis. So this is the point in the lecture where I start asking questions to the audience and I say, hey, does anybody want to ask me why you become so relaxed that you become paralyzed? Or do you have any ideas as to why that might be? Somebody generally raises their hand and says, well, so maybe you don't sleepwalk, across your house or something. That's exactly right. And so the paralysis that occurs during REM sleep is so that our bodies do not act out our dreams. I'm going to digress for 1 second. I'm going to tell you about a patient where this paralytic mechanism does not work. So I'm from a small town outside of Atlanta, Georgia called Sandy Springs, Georgia, which has a decent sized hunting community. And if you're a hunter, you know that if you shoot a doe and don't kill it, you either have to slit its throat or crack its neck. It's the most humane thing to do. This gentleman woke up with his wife's head ready to crack her neck. You can't make this stuff up. So question number 1 that I usually get from the audience, did he kill her? No lives were spared for the telling of this story, I can assure you. The second question that I always get asked is, are they still married? She is a patient woman, I'll give her that. But here's the point that I want to make is with one medication, working with his physician, clonazepam at 0.25 milligrams, we were able to quell this behavior and have him remain safe. The most fascinating thing with this gentleman who had this mechanism that was not working is he has a situation called REM behavior disorder. Turns out in 35% of cases, it's a precursor for Parkinson's syndrome. And that's exactly what it was with him. We were able to get him to neurology almost 10 years ahead of symptoms and change his life forever. The reason I bring this story up is sleep is a window into your health, period. If you're not sleeping well, there is either something physically going on with you or something mentally and emotionally going on with you. That's how it works, guys. So when everybody's out there wondering, oh, what can I do to fix my sleep or not fix my sleep? Look internally. I promise you, you will find your answers. Believe it or not, REM sleep is the one stage of sleep where we actually increase our caloric intake. We actually burn more calories in REM than in any other one. And again, dreaming occurs because of an increase in brain activity. Believe it or not, most REM sleep occurs in the last third of the night. This is one of the reasons why people are now having these things called quaran dreams, where they're extending their sleep period and having funky dreams. If they just woke up at their normal bedtime, they would stop having crazy dreams. Looking at this conceptually, there's this whole idea of a circadian rhythm, not just for sleep. Look at all of these hormones and all of these medical functions, that bodily functions that occur on a very predictable rhythm. Cortisol, melatonin, heart rate, core body temperature, all of these are incredibly predictable. Well, I created this quiz called the Chrono Quiz, and the quiz takes into account personality, sleep timing preference, and something called sleep drive. And the results actually give you personalized chrono categories. Now, to be fair, these categories are not necessarily new. You may have heard of people ever being called an early bird or a night owl. This is what I'm talking about. These, in fact, are chronotypes. I changed the names because honestly, I'm a mammal, not a bird, and I didn't relate to the bird. So I decided that early birds, and by the way, I picked animals that actually represent this in their circadian lives. So lions are my early birds, and lions are early morning optimists with a medium sleep drive. These are usually my go-getters, leaders, and COOs of a company. They're likely to prioritize health. They have a tendency to make a plan and stick to it every day. They go from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 to step 4. But they have a tendency to go to bed early. A lot of people say to me, gosh, I wish I was an early bird lion, Michael. I'd wake up early and get so much done. By the way, lions can't go to dinner and a movie. They're exhausted, right? They've been up since 5 a.m. for God's sakes. Like, they don't want to go out and have fun. And guess what? Socially, that can have some significant implications. Some of the most famous lions in the world include people like the CEO of Apple, Kelly Ripa, Benjamin Franklin, even Maya Angelou. Bears are the middle ground, what we used to call hummingbirds. Believe it or not, they make up 55% of the population. These are solar sleepers with a healthy sleep drive. These are some of my favorite people because they actually are extroverted, get stuff done. They have a great disposition, great personality, and they make up a tremendous amount of the population. Very fun, enjoyable group. Most of society is actually built around a bear's schedule. Some of the most famous bears in the world include Stephen King, Jeff Bezos, Ellen DeGeneres, and even my friend Ariana Huffington, who's a big proponent of sleep. Wolves actually take the place of night owls. I'm a wolf. I am a known night owl. As I told you before, I don't go to bed before midnight, hardly ever. We make up about 15 to 20% of the population. We're the late night creatives and out of the box thinkers. We actually crave novelty and high risk. And we never make lists. If I make a list, I go from step 1 to step 12 to step 47. And it makes perfect sense to me, but anybody who's a lion sitting next to me has no idea. We actually have a tendency to be a bit more socially introverted, although I don't suffer from that because obviously I can get on a stage and talk to people. Many of the people who are late nighters are actually some of my most creative people. So my artists, my actors, people who, believe it or not, are socially introverted, but can certainly get on a stage. Deeply loyal friends and some of the most famous wolves in the world are known as Elon Musk, Dave Asprey, Jay Leno, and believe it or not, even my friend Rachel Ray. The final group of people in my contribution to the literature, remember, there were early birds, there were night owls, and people in the middle. I've covered those three, but what I discovered was that there's a fourth group, which I call dolphins. By the way, this is all genetically predetermined based on genes that have had what's called a SNP, or a single nucleotide polymorphism, on the PER3 gene in particular. There are actually 30-something different genes that can change your chronorhythms different ways, but the PER3 gene is the one that I looked at specifically. And what I discovered over the course of time was there's an insomnia that's created genetically. These people represent, believe it or not, almost 10% of the population. Very erratic sleep schedules, short sleep drive, may be diagnosed as insomniacs. They're highly intelligent, but have a little bit of OCD and are never quite finished with the project, have a little bit of anxiety, and it has a big effect on them. So some of the most famous dolphins are Shakespeare, the CEO of Pepsi and Yahoo, Richard Branson, and even Steve Aoki. He's an electronic dance music DJ. So who really cares, right? Okay, this is fun. I take a quiz and maybe I learn what my chronotype is. But what can I do with this information to change my health? This is where it gets really cool. So who cares about my biology? I do. And so if we know the timing of all those hormones, based on our chronorhythm, right? So early birds, melatonin stops early. Night owls, melatonin stops later. If we know what hormones are used in specific activities, like, for example, intimacy or exercise or drinking coffee, right? Then we can actually fit our schedule to meet our natural rhythms and get the biggest bang for our buck in literally anything that you want to do. It's actually incredibly simple. So let's start out with the biggest problem that most people have, the most abused substance in the world, caffeine, right? So I know people are saying, oh my gosh, Michael, don't take away my caffeine. What are you thinking? Believe it or not, there are two rhythms that have a tremendous effect on caffeine. One is called your cortisol rhythm. So in order to wake up out of a state of unconsciousness, you need two hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and they both have to jack up pretty high. When you have a brain that's got cortisol and adrenaline running around in it, if you add caffeine to it, it does almost nothing, right? So when you look at the effectiveness of cortisol and adrenaline, if you were to compare them to caffeine, it would be like comparing cocaine to weak tea, right? In terms of how effective and powerful they are. So you want to keep the adrenaline and cortisol, allow them naturally to slowly begin to dissipate. It takes approximately 90 minutes, but that's when you can have your caffeine and it's far more effective. We also have a metabolic rhythm that helps us learn more about caffeine as well, in that it takes the average human approximately 7 to 8 hours to eliminate half of the caffeine from their body. That's called the half-life. That becomes important because when you stop caffeine, we want to make sure that it doesn't have an effect on your ability to fall asleep in the evenings. So what I've done is created a schedule based on people's chronotypes to teach them exactly what times of day they can have caffeine. So if you got your chronotype, or take a picture of the slide, we'll actually make the slides available. This shows you two different times based on when you should have caffeine. Now, you'll notice one thing is in the final category, which is wolves, myself included, is we only have one caffeinated break during the day. Why is this? Because we elevate at night. I get much more energy at night. Quite frankly, if I had a cup of coffee at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I might not go to bed until 3 o'clock in the morning because I've got so much energy. So understanding how that works becomes incredibly effective when you're trying to measure your own energy level or give yourself your own highs and lows. So as you can see here, I'm a runner. This was a particularly fun picture because I was out for a run and there was a beautiful a monument to Martin Luther King Jr. and it said, "I have a dream." And I thought I would take a picture in front of the dream, being the sleep guy talking about exercise and running. So is there a right time to run? You bet there is. It just depends on what you want to do. If you're trying to burn fat, then actually you want to run early in the morning, believe it or not, on an empty stomach. I didn't say a dehydrated stomach. I said an empty stomach. You must hydrate before exercising, during, and after. But if you're really trying to burn fat, you can actually burn fat straight from your fat if you exercise based on fasting workout. But if that's not your goal, if you actually work out based on your chronotype, your performance will be better and it won't feel as difficult. There's something called perceived exertion, meaning how effortful an exercise feels. And that changes throughout the day based on your chronotype. So these times for people are actually very good in terms of when they should be exercising. So when we look at going to bed, which is our next thing, we want to talk about what could be the difference here. So this is where the chronotypes actually diverge quite a bit. So one of the things you'll notice is that lion and bears will have 5 sleep cycles, but it turns out that dolphins and wolves have 4. This is one of the reasons why insomniacs characteristically don't have a large sleep drive, meaning their body doesn't want to sleep for long periods of time. If you'll notice, wolves are somewhat the same way, which is myself. And if you noticed, I told you that I go to bed at midnight and I wake up at around 6:13 every day, which gives me about 6 hours and 15 minutes. So I'm even a little light compared to this average. But to be fair, I fall asleep fairly quickly. So that 40 minutes to fall asleep actually pulls out nicely for me. But this is a great little rubric that you can use, or equation, to discover what time do you go to bed and how much sleep do you actually need. So what I did was I did the math for you. So if you turned out to be a lion, you might be waking up at 6, but I'm having you go to bed at 10:10. Notice that's 7 hours and 50 minutes of sleep. So again, not everybody needs 8 hours of sleep. And you can notice the different times based on what it is you want to try to do. Now, I love to do things to help people fall asleep better. And this is one of my favorite all-time recipes. It is 100% organic, and it works really, really well to help people fall asleep. I call it banana tea. Most people don't know it, but they're deficient in magnesium, and magnesium runs over 300 functions in the body. But it turns out that bananas are loaded with magnesium, which is awesome. But it turns out that the peel has 3 times the amount of magnesium as the fruit itself. So what am I going to ask you to do? No, I'm not going to ask you to eat the banana peel, but I'm going to teach you how to make banana tea. So take an organic banana and just wash it off. Cut off the tip and the stem, cut it in half, leave the fruit in and the peel on it. Take the 2 halves and drop it into 3 cups of boiling water and just boil it till it turns brown. Yes, my recipe is boiling a banana. That is the whole gist of it. But after 4 minutes or so, you drink the water. It's loaded with phytosteroids. It's loaded with magnesium. It doesn't interact with any medication. You can give it to seniors. You can give it to children. And it's a great way to get your magnesium. As a little hint, I had one mom make it at the beginning of the week, and she poured it into popsicle molds, and she would give it to her children as a dessert after dinner, and they fell right to sleep. Hint, hint for moms out there. So what are some generalized tips that we can do to understand more about sleeping better at night? So step number 1, let's talk about caffeine. Remember, wait 90 minutes. That's basically 1 sleep cycle after you wake up to have your first caffeinated beverage. I promise you, you will notice the difference. If you just try this tomorrow, I can assure you, you will notice the difference. Got it. Remember, stay hydrated. Sleep in and of itself is a dehydrative event. Drink a full 18 ounces of water every time you wake up. I promise you it will be important. And 15 minutes of sunlight turns out to turn off that melatonin faucet in the brain. So when I wake up in the morning, one of the things I do is I have physical activity every day. Please do me a favor, try not to have physical activity too close to bedtime, but make sure that you get that sunlight early in the morning, and make sure that you stop caffeine by 2 p.m. in the evenings. So Anna has waved at me that I'm running out of time. So I'm going to give you my 5 steps so that everybody can figure out how to sleep well. So step number 1 is to pick 1 wake up time and stick to it. Hopefully the one that I gave you earlier in the presentation. Step number 2 is to stop caffeine by 2 p.m. Step number 3 is to stop alcohol 3 hours before bed. Notice I said you can drink, but if you stop 3 hours and you've had 2 or 3 drinks, you can get that alcohol out of your system, hydrate, and then hopefully it does not affect your sleep. Limit exercise 4 hours before bed, but exercise daily. Remember, sleep is recovery. If you don't do anything to recover from, you are not going to sleep well. And get 15 minutes of sunlight every day. I promise you that will also help with your circadian rhythmicity. Anna, I'm going to open it up to questions now. If I've got any time left.
Hi, Michael. It's Nancy in Palm Beach.
Nancy.
Hello, how are you? And we've run way over time, even for questions, but we got to take one, and I'm sure Anna's got a great one from somebody in the globe, around the globe. So we'll go to Anna for 1 question, and then I'm going to have to move on. You're muted, Anna. Thank you.
Shaggy is asking about the lymphatic system and why this is not focused on.
So when we look at the so thank you for bringing that up. So when we look at the glymphatic system, there's a whole host of research that's been quite interesting, and it has a lot to do with the removal of waste and proteins during stages 3 and 4 when I was talking about growth hormone and that stage. So it wasn't the focus of the talk because I was staying primarily looking at circadian rhythmicity. However, the glymphatic system is something that we've fairly recently, within the last 4 to 5 years, really been able to well define. And the research that's going on in that area is stunning, like really interesting stuff. People really need to take a look at what's going on and how sleep affects so many aspects of our life. Great question.
Michael, I'm so sorry to have to end this. I remember when you and I spoke and I said there'll be time for a few questions, and you said I've never done Q&A that was under an hour. And I can see why. So I'm going to invite you now to do a wellness masterclass with us online sometime after the first of the year, and we'll do tons of questions. We'd love to have you back because it's been fascinating, and thank you so, so much for your time.
It is my absolute pleasure, and I'm going to do it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.